PhD in sustainability studies to be a change agent in your industry or career. Laura Corrales is the Senior Associate at ESG in Sustainability and Climate Change, and she considers herself to be a social intrapreneur that uses empathy to influence and drive change at different levels. Please join me in welcoming Laura to the stage. Hello. How are you?
Good, I'm good.
Good. Welcome. It's nice to have you here, Laura.
Thank you.
Right off the top, I have to ask, what is a social intrapreneur?
Wow, great question, and thank you for asking that question. I think before we get started, I just wanted to quickly acknowledge the land that we're gathering on today.
Yes.
I just want to acknowledge its history, its caregivers, and thankful for the First Nations that have taken care of this space. Well, social intrapreneur is something I'm still trying to describe, even though there's been a lot of research in the area of intrapreneurship. But for me, something that happened as an accident.
Okay.
And it took me a while to define myself as such, because I believe in the area of sustainability, climate change, social justice, and many other spaces, there's an urgency to action, right? And a lot of people inside organizations, there's a lot of bureaucracy, right? And mostly young people or people with ideas and solutions, they want to take action and they tend to start their own projects. So we see a lot of entrepreneurs, right? You see people, and I guess the reason why we're here today and we have hackathons and we have different activities is to encourage entrepreneurship, allow people to find their own solutions. But I always had that feeling like, oh my God, but I don't have a solution. Like, I just don't have an idea, and was fighting with what can I do to change systems? And it was just only when I found a job as a sales representative in a big logistics company that I understood that maybe I'm not an entrepreneur and maybe I am an intrapreneur. So I started to create initiatives within the organization. I started to very small sustainability committee in this organization that has 400,000 employees.
Wow.
Very hierarchical, and then working at the corporate office. It's very, very interesting landscape to navigate. But it was the moment that I embraced that and I said, you know what? I'm not an entrepreneur, and that's fine. That's okay. I don't need to save the world with my own idea, but I do have a role to play, and found a way to do it, and it was actually through networks, I have to be honest, networks like the Global Shapers community, of which I was part here in Montreal, that I understood that there are other folks working on that, and there's social intrapreneurship institutes where they teach you to how to navigate these complicated networks within organizations, that I really embraced it, and I took one day actually to sit down and think about my purpose, my values, and I came with this phrase, you know what? I see a lot of social entrepreneurship is a thing, it's something that is being developed, and I said, well, I'm also working for social justice, for climate change, for sustainability from within organizations, and I'm going to give it a name, and that name is social intrapreneurship.
I love it. It's so true that you almost have to do the internal work first before you make any kind of outward change, so I love that. Oh, we have someone who says hola from Colombia.
Oh, hola.
They love seeing you at campus party. So you're originally from Colombia.
I am, yes.
And so maybe you can tell me a bit about your journey to becoming an entrepreneur. You told us about sort of the soul searching you were doing at the end, but how did you find yourself in Montreal?
Well, that's a great story. I guess the reason is in front of me. My husband came after him, but no. Well, my journey in sustainability is something that I had not planned. I literally moved from Colombia to Boston first, as I was waiting for my paperwork to move to Canada. And in that little stop, I was frustrated because my paperwork with Canada didn't work the way I wanted, and I landed in Boston. But that little stop in Boston was significant. And I'm going to tell you why. I think when I moved to Boston, and folks from Colombia that are watching this will probably agree, we do have a waste problem in Colombia, but this waste problem that we have is mostly organic waste. We have a lot of organic waste, and challenging situations handling that. But when I moved to Boston, I had this cultural shock, but everything is to go. There's coffee cups to go, food to go, like everything's to go. And I used to live in front of a Starbucks where that trash can was full of plastic cups. But when you think about it, these are resource intense products, right? They're coming from trees, and there's plastic involved, which is oil and petroleum, right? So I have a logistics and supply chain background and started to question, there's something broken in the supply chain, because it doesn't make sense that we're extracting resources, paying people, shipping things around the world, and then just throwing it away. And then what does away mean? Where is away? So I started to have these questions, but realized that it started to get very curious, and someone told me, I'm living in Boston, they told me, you know, Laura, there's actually a class that is called Life Cycle Assessment and Sustainable Supply Chains. So I said, oh, well, I have a supply chain background. Let me just give it a try. And I went through that class just thinking about this narrow problem, which is a huge problem, but very specific on waste management and circular economy. But when I started that program, realized that sustainability is a thing, and I learned the word sustainability for the first time, and decided that I wanted to work in that space. So the moment I had the opportunity to know that there are master's programs, that there are people working in the field, I realized I wanted to take that change. There's a bit on the story. I then from Boston moved to Montreal, and in Boston I started purposely getting engaged in grassroots initiatives. As an immigrant, I knew that I needed to have North American experience to be successful in the space before I landed in Montreal. So purposely I started to find volunteering groups, organizing conferences. We organized the biggest sustainability and conference in Boston that it was zero waste.
Wow.
For the first time. We made the news, and it was very exciting. So when I moved to Montreal, I thought, let me just do the same. Let me finish my school, let me find a volunteering group, and definitely will get a job. Let me just learn French. Started to do everything at once, but and with this anxiety as well of like, I want to take action. I want to start something. And I had the opportunity to work with different organizations in Montreal, mostly social entrepreneurship, helping women with their own ideas to create change. Went back to school, decided to take 2 classes, started to learn French, and all that had a toll on me.
Yeah.
At some moment yeah, go ahead.
Sounds busy.
It sounds busy, and more than that, I think there's a thing that people wanting to create change have is just this urgency.
Yeah.
And this feel that I had the idea that I needed to have a sustainability role in order to exercise change.
Right.
So at one point, I was very busy, and my mental health, I struggled with my mental health. I had to take a break. I had to withdraw my classes. I had to go quit my job.
Wow.
And then with my husband, we had to make the decision of, you have to go back to Colombia and just rest. You need to chill. And when I was back at home, imagine yourself as after 5 years married, doing your master's, you are back at your teenager's room, pink.
Yeah.
Being taken care by your mom, your dad again. So it was a challenging time for me, but it was what I needed to realize that you have to be well within yourself before you can actually create impact. And
Absolutely, yeah. Good for you for taking that break, because I think a lot of times people don't know when they need to stop.
Absolutely, and I think to that point, what's really important is your support system. I think the people around me could see that, you know, this is, even though she's doing great things, and it depends how you define success, right? Like, in the eyes of others, I was successful. I was doing my master's, I had a job, recently just moving into a city, I was volunteering, I was helping others, but is that success, right? At what cost, at what price? So when I went back to Colombia, and I was there for 3 months, you know, I realized that nothing happened. Like, I was thinking it was my only chance to have a job in sustainability, and all the people that I work with, I saw them as giants. And they are for the work they're doing, but so I am for wanting to do things, right? And when I was there and I realized that, you know, nothing happened. I quit my job and the company's there. I withdraw school, my school's there. And all I have really is my family and my desire to affect change. So when I came back to Montreal, I decided to take a different approach, slow down, and just find a job. right? I just needed to pay my rent and get groceries. So I found a job, again, as a sales representative in this big corporation that has a special place in my heart. But that, didn't stop me from taking action. I realized that sustainability is not a title, it's not having studies in the area, it's just wanting to make change. And I decided, slowly, now that I'm on a safe foundation, I have a job and things are better, let me just start small. So I started a sustainability committee that then led to working with different high levels in the organization. It led to having a space at the United Nations speaking about Hispanic leadership and what does it mean to be a young employee as well. And I spoke a lot about giving us the space to take action regardless the jobs we have. And we're talking about sustainability and climate change, but there's so many other issues, right? Diversity and inclusion, gender equality, all the sustainable development goals are ahead of us. And today we have leaders at COP26 talking about how to take space. And I think you need to give young people a space to work and do things they want to do inside organizations.
Great. We already have some questions lighting up the chat, if you don't mind. I think one of them actually fits right into this story. Someone watched your online session and said that it was impressive to hear about your determination to try to talk with your company's CSO. And I wonder if this is part of that story. So I'm curious how you approached someone in that position of power and where you got that bravery and confidence to do so, and how maybe some advice for people who are listening who might want to do something similar in their own organization. How did you approach that person?
Yeah, well, that's a great question because it had good things and bad things.
Okay.
But then from the bad things, I did pivot. I think you just have to ask. And in this, there's a sense of urgency, and we do need to act. So at this moment, we need to break down hierarchical systems and just ask the question. And the little backdrop of that story is that when I joined this company, very excited to take change and feeling more safe to take change, my first email was to the Chief Sustainability Officer. Of course, I never got an answer. And that gave me, just having that there's a program in terms of sustainability was very, very helpful. And my email was basically, hey, I just joined, I'm in Montreal, I want to get involved. And when I think about it now, probably wasn't the right thing to do. What I did do, right, because that started to reach out, I went directly to the top. And that caused some frustration. Okay, I didn't get a reply. Let me go to a manager, trying to find the program and getting frustrated and not finding the right people to take action. But that made me actually create my own space. So I said, maybe, these people are busy tackling the company's sustainability strategy. So I might as well start something. And that's how I started to have, and I talk in my session about two kind of networks. In companies, you have a hierarchical network, but you also have an adaptive network. And I started to leverage that network, which is my peers. I started to talk about sustainability. I talked to my manager about getting some training. I talked to the cafeteria people about changing the utensils for reusable and so on. And I started to build my personal brand in a way that people knew, oh, Laura, she's all about sustainability. So from being silly questions about, what's recyclable, what not, and not silly, important, but simple questions like that, to Laura, I have a client asking me about sustainability, carbon reduction, can you jump into this cold?
Nice.
So using my other kind of network, I pivoted into being an internal expert, and then I went back to leadership though, but this time I used a different approach. Instead of being, hey, I want to get involved, I went with value. And value was just, I had more knowledge, I understood better the organization, and I went to them saying, hey, I know you have this challenge, I knew what the challenge was, and I'm finishing my master's, would you mind if we work together and I help you solve that challenge? And I was able to work directly with our senior sustainability officer for the region, actually globally, for my capstone. And I think that really helped me then leverage that for job and trickled into something very tangible. But I would say quickly, the second approach was a win-win situation. You have to find value
Right.
to offer.
And show it what's in it for them to engage with you.
Yes.
I love what I'm hearing. I'm hearing about networking, about engaging with people who are horizontal with you and finding other champions sort of in the organization. So, you know, not safety in numbers, but power in numbers when you're moving sort of horizontally as well as vertically in the company. I love that. I love it. I have a couple other questions here about management. They're sort of touching on the same thing, so I'm going to combine these two questions. Someone is asking if top management in companies are really committed to sustainability, or are they in it for brand promotion? And another person asked, do you think there's still a lot of greenwashing in companies? And how do you deal with this challenge?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I think companies are dealing with that same thin line of there's so much scrutiny nowadays, and it's necessary. There's a big call for transparency. Companies need to be transparent because stakeholders need the information. And I think it really depends of the company's values. It always goes to the values. But I have, when you mentioned my intro, there's something that I defined a while ago, and it's empathy. And how do I use empathy? So in spaces like corporate, you could find a lot of what the questions just mentioned. Yes, you can still find greenwashing. Yes, you can still find leaders that don't know how to balance, or that it's not clear if they do have a commitment.
Right.
But what I tend to do is approach it with empathy and understand, okay, before I judge, I withdraw judgment. I understand, where are they coming from? Is it that they don't understand the business case? Is it a lack of resources? What is it? Where are they coming from? So that then you can find a win-win situation where you can change the strategy. I do feel, because we need champions inside organizations. If you say no, of course, you have to align in values when you find your employer. But even in those places where you feel like, maybe this is not my place, when it feels like that, maybe that's your place. Because you'll be that trailblazer, you'll be that disruptor that creates the change from within. And what would happen in those corporations that don't have people wanting to change? It's hard though, because it's this David and Goliath situation where top management, but I do believe in bottom-up approaches. I do believe in the voice of employees saying, we want a committee. I won't give names, but there's companies with strong climate advocacy groups out there calling out their CEOs.
Right.
And what would we do without those employees taking action? So I do feel those points mentioned in the questions are real, but you need champions within the organizations to disrupt those systems and change them.
So for the people listening, it's really about where they can get an inch, where they can find a friend, where they can sort of agitate from within in order to make maybe the companies take a look and think about it and consider. I love it. We have another question here. Were you bullied or discouraged by any of those you were working with that didn't think the same way about sustainability on your journey?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I think, and that's again where empathy comes handy, just understanding that sometimes they don't want to hurt you, they don't want to make you feel bad. They're afraid of change.
Right.
And people are afraid of change, and that's why we're here like 5 years after the Paris Agreement, still having conversations on like how to get there by 2030, 2050. But my approach was just to understand where people was coming from. I think maybe I could just share a story. When I first joined this ex-company, not other than emailing the chief sustainability officer, I also started to be very vocal. I started to send weekly emails to everyone in my department, 50 people. Morning, did you know sustainability news and stuff? I thought I was doing something great, but a month later, my manager called me out to a side and told me, Laura, you need to stop sending those emails. People are bothered by your emails.
Okay.
And I'm like, oh, really? And I realized my mistake there is never asking them, what are you interested in?
Yeah.
Or having this conversation and just assuming that because this is a topic that is, it's at the moment and I'm doing something good, everyone should care. At the beginning it was hard, but then I understood, let me just have a conversation one-on-one. I started to reduce my emails and just send them to those that really wanted to engage. And slowly the word of mouth goes, and people started to say, hey, can you enroll me on those emails?
Nice.
Now I want to be part. And that's where that adaptive network also does its work by itself. And I think, I think if you understand where people are coming from, you can always move the needle.
I was about to say, knowing your audience is very valuable.
That's
and knowing who your audience isn't is also very valuable. So that's good, because I love that lesson. I think that's so important, because not everyone, is going to be attracted with the same message or with the same newsletter. So that's very smart insight.
Yeah, and if I may add just quickly, it's also not judging them for not wanting to take part yet. I think everyone in these kind of topics, and these are very complex topics when you talk about sustainable development, talk about diversity and inclusion, pay equity, and all the other topics I've mentioned. These are personal journeys.
Yeah.
Even though we need urgency, we need action, we have to understand that each person has its own personal journey. Learning about climate change, my workplace was very intergenerational. We had 3 folks that were my age, millennials, but the majority was in their last years of service at the company. They've been there for 25 years, and suddenly there's this young lady telling them what to do with their printer, what to do with their trash can, how to recycle. So I went with this very aggressive approach, but when I understood is that it's not that they did not want to change, I needed to tailor my approach.
Yeah.
And slowly they came along. They came a long way. That I needed to understand. So that's why I feel empathy is very important.
I was about to say, yeah, absolutely. You used empathy to get them in the end. We have another question here that is actually touching on what you were just talking about with COP26. What was your impression of the commitments, which are in quotes, from global leaders at these talks?
Well, I think we still have some time to wait to see, the end result. But I'm happy to see different diverse players having conversations. I think that's very important. And I've seen very, very bold commitments from some countries. I don't know, am I allowed to mention countries here?
Yeah. I mean, it's a global audience,
it's a
so
global
they might
audience.
even be watching.
Yes,
yeah.
Okay. With corporate, I tend to be very careful, but this is a global issue. But the commitments like India, right? That was one that we've been waiting for a while. By 2070, net zero. That's a huge thing.
Huge.
Commitments like money to support the global South in transitioning.
Very
That's also
important.
huge. We got the development of the task force of banks to put in money to support transition in the global South. And you were talking about greenwashing, and this, I do feel that we pay attention a lot to carbon commitments, where they're very important, but there's other developments that help intrapreneurs move the needle, and I'll tell you why. We had this commitment where many standard associations came together to develop a framework for sustainability transparency.
Okay.
And this ties down to the question about greenwashing. You see very, fluffy sustainability reports. They're confusing. You go to CSR webpage and they're beautiful. Apparently, all companies are doing great. But in these platforms like COP26, we not only have countries setting national targets, we have the private sector doing their due diligence on how to communicate this better. And most importantly, we have the investors community that is saying, you need to report better because we don't understand those fluffy reports. We need to really see what your commitments are, how are you tackling climate risk, how are you mitigating, and so on. So I think that is a huge development, having a consolidated framework. And during the day, I work in consulting, supporting companies with one of the issues is transparency, how to be more transparent and communicate sustainability action. And that's a huge one. I think having a standardized framework, I don't know if people in the audience are familiar with sustainability reporting. I'm getting very nerdy here, but we have one for climate, we have one for investors, and we have so many frameworks, we have different standards, and having one consolidated framework, it's very, very helpful. So I think I'm seeing these commitments from different perspectives.
Yeah, and it's not as sexy as a slogan as saving the ocean, but frameworks and standards and processes are super important. So I definitely am hearing you on that. Yeah. We have another question that sort of ties into this, just about the diversity of causes in the sustainability space. What is your biggest priority, or what do you think should be the biggest priority? Should it, is it water? Is it pollution? Is it carbon? Is it oil? Where are you sort of invested or most moved by in the sustainability space?
Wow. Well, and I'm going to answer very, very personally. I think I am very focused on corporate sustainability because I believe the private sector has a big role to play just because they touch every space in our economy. Yeah. And the way we're working through that, and that's why I believe so much in intrapreneurship, is we need champions in any industry to work through that. Not to say that definitely carbon and reducing and taking carbon from our atmosphere is the biggest challenge and one that we need, but climate is not only that, and you see it in other realities, environmental justice, right? Yeah. How do communities that live next to sites that are contaminated, how do you reconcile that? And then I believe that, in corporate sustainability, we have a huge role to play, and that's what I'm tackling. And another aspect to that is what's material to the company. And so for some, it might be water, and I think that's the power of taking a look of what's your role, not only as a person, but as a company leader. And if we have people in the audience that lead their own companies, you always need to understand, because it could put in a pressure that you say, I'm not working on carbon, so I'm not helping solve this bigger issue. But if it's material to your company, if you're producing, I don't know, if you're working with seafood, then for you maybe ocean matters, and we need people working there. But if you're working on, I don't know, textile, maybe supply chain is a bigger problem for you. So I think it's very hard to just decide on one, and maybe it's just because I'm a generalist. That's where I'm at this moment. And even though I did start it very focused, I was very focused on circular economy and waste. And then when I understood that this is a very complex problem, I went through a more generalist approach, and maybe I'll come back to a more narrow approach. But I think the message there is there's not right and wrong, and we need people working on all those problems. Right. And I'm sorry I'm not answering the question on
it is. No, it's very good. We have another question that just popped up before I'll ask you mine, but what do you think about what Canada is doing, and is the Canadian government, in your opinion, doing enough? Or if you were going in there as a sustainability consultant, what would you be suggesting perhaps that they do?
Oh my God. Oh, well, I think this question, it's huge.
Yeah.
It's huge, and that's why we have our representatives in COP discussing. But what would I suggest? That's a huge question. I think more, our targets are important. I think that's great that we have set up targets, ambitious targets. It's great that we're using financial mechanisms to motivate the private sector, and I'll give an example. Just during COVID, our recovery resources or money that was given to companies that needed, how do you say this? I'm forgetting my English. Subventions or money to recover. They need to present climate risk report. Okay. And that is something like countries like New Zealand, they did. Yes, you need money to go through these moments. We need to see your climate risk approach. So it's a great moment to ask them to take a specific action. And you know what they need from you, and then you're asking them to see something. So I think that's leadership, absolutely. Just a couple of countries did that. But then I forgot the other thing I was going to mention.
That's okay.
But I think we are demonstrating leadership in some aspects. I think an aspect, just maybe I'm a newcomer, I come from Colombia. I think developed economies have a role to play in empowering the global south. They do emit more carbon, and for instance, Canada, even though as a nation we don't emit that much, we are the first country that emits the most per capita.
Okay.
And that is a lot of responsibility for countries like Colombia, where most of our energy is hydro, and our emissions are very, very small in the global landscape. However, were impacted greatly by extreme weather events because of our geography.
Yeah.
And we have less space than Canada has to accommodate people.
Right.
So I think there's an aspect of justice that countries in the global north have to, take on responsibility and support that transition, not only in their own countries, but they need to support other countries in the journey, and understanding that there has been a history of extraction, right?
Yes.
There's a history with a lot of resources come from the global south, and supply chain and textile and food, and how do you get a mango in December here, right?
Yeah.
A lot of resources are coming from other places. So I think there needs to be responsibility and collaboration. And I want to put it, I think these relationships have to be established without, not regret, but without bad feelings of you did this, now you owe it to me. No, there has to be a sense of empathy, just understanding that now we're acknowledging what happened, and there's a sense of accountability and responsibility to move forward together.
Good. This has been so fascinating. Just my last question to you. I'm so sad we're out of time. I feel like I could talk to you for a long time about this, but what are you working on right now? Where can people join you and follow you? How can we stay connected to you and support your work?
Well, what I'm working on, I'm still an entrepreneur. I'm still actually just recently joined a new company, and I'm in the early stages of navigating this new company and finding my place. But I'm working also in public policy, and it's just a more recent interest that I have. I'm part of a fellowship called Action Canada, and I would invite everyone to check it out if they want to get involved. I'm working in the intersection of public policy, immigration, Indigenous relations, and that's just one topic that we decided to choose. But I'm exploring that. I'm exploring public policy. I continue to explore the corporate landscape. And how can people follow? Just message me on LinkedIn. People call me the LinkedIn queen. I use it a lot, and I have used it for navigating networks internally and externally. So always happy to have 30 minutes chats with folks if interested.
Wow, Laura, thank you so much for joining us and giving us all of these amazing insights. And I hope you've inspired everyone here today and who are watching online to be a sustainability champion wherever they are. Thank you so much. Please join me in thanking Laura.
So much. Thank you so much.
Alors, maintenant, je voudrais inviter l'hôte de le prochain panel sur la scène. Disons bonjour à Suzanne Guévremont.